Clark Lee's first line of defense should be much improved as stars emerge.
You are Locked On Vandy, your daily podcast on the Vanderbilt Commodores, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right. Welcome into the Locked On Vandy podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Corey Burton. Thanks for making Locked On Vandy your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On today's episode, we discuss Vandy's chances in the first conference game at Mizzou. Do they have a chance? The defense should be much improved, but Clark Lee's first line of defense, the defensive line, must be stingy versus the run and get pressure on the quarterback in order to find said success. But before we get into how Vandy's defensive line can help the defense accomplish these things, we got to look at personnel. Who's going to emerge as the star or stars, plural? Well, it's a pretty good list of guys here. It's I'm kind of impressed with what this defensive line brings to the table. I mean, you've got three deep at all four spots. Your Razor is kind of like your hybrid guy. Your stand up in the line guy, so kind of more like it could be a variety of different people, but Miles Caper, Aeneas DeCosmo, GJ Decate, and Jalen Ruth are your four guys there at the Razor position. Corday Sidnor, Zaylen Wood, Darren Agu, and Linus Zunk as this defensive end. Your interior guys, defensive tackle Christian James, Bradley Mann, Devin Lee, nose tackle Yylon Otara, Demarion Thomas, and Glenn Seabrooks as your projected depth chart there. So those are the names just to quickly bark those out. But obviously the one that stands out and the one that stood out the most in spring practice, and this is who I believe will be the first star to emerge because he did it at Purdue. He transferred in from Purdue. He brought the energy during spring practice. He was pretty unstoppable as well. Corday Sidnor is a guy that at defensive end could, if you needed him to, could stand up. But again, in 4-down sets, he's going to be that 5 technique. And more than likely, if they slide over into a 3-down, he'll be a 4 technique or 4-eye. And the other defensive tackle, which is likely Christian James, will be the other 4 technique. And the nose tackle will be the interior guy. And if they go to a 4 front, he'll be the 1 technique. And the defensive tackle, Christian James, will probably bump down to a 3, and your Razor will come down and be your other defensive end, probably in nickel passing situations where you want to rush 4 and drop the rest, or do some things with your fronts where you're shifting guys down and around, things like that. But Corday Sidnor is going to be the first guy that I think, when you look at the talent and you look at how it's kind of laid out, he's going to be the guy that's going to get after you. He's going to be the first guy that you hear about. He's going to be the one that's shooting the gaps, stuffing the run right in the teeth, things like that. He's going to be an absolute menace. He was in spring practice in one-on-ones. He was in team periods, things like that. But he's going to be an absolute menace. And I think they're going to have to find, and this depth chart will probably shuffle around several times during training camp. There'll probably be a pretty good rotation as well, because I'm predicting that these guys are going to do a lot of movement, a lot of slanting, a lot of shooting gaps and twists and games and things. So you're going to try to, as best as you can, get a good rotation going. So like Zaylen Wood's going to play a lot, and he may be on the field at the same time as Corday Sidnor. You may have a situation to where your bookends are those 2 guys, and your nose tackle is somebody that's a little bit heavier. He may go, if you want a bigger front, one of those Razors may come out, and Zaylen Wood might go in to give you a little more beef in a 4-down front. Let's say you're in a heavy run situation, you want 4 guys down on the line of scrimmage, and you don't want you don't want a smaller, faster guy on the edge there, and you're kind of in a tight situation. You may throw some things with personnel around as well. But Zaylen Wood, I think, has a little bit of developing to do as well, and he's somebody that will have a chance to really, really learn behind Corday Sidnor. Miles Capers and Aeneas Di Cosmo, I think those two guys at the Razor position are pretty interchangeable. I think those guys both offer really, really good options there. When you look at what the Razor has to do, the Razor is responsible for the field edge. If it's a boundary field situation, you'll probably see them to the field, which is the wide side. They're gonna be asked to cover a little bit more space out there on the edge as well. So like they're in a situation where they're covering a tight end, or they're a wide 9 technique, or they're somebody that's standing up out there on the edge and kind of making sure that gap is closed and stretched to where the running back can't get vertical into that gap. So I'm really I think either one of those guys being in the game. Now you could see like a lightning package where both of those guys are in on the ends, and you really need to get some really good pass rush. So I think the key here is whichever these guys are going to play on the ends, it's going to come down to versatility. What can you do versus, what can you do aside from what you're good at? What all do you offer to the table? And they're going to find that out a lot during fall camp, because you're going to have plenty of opportunities. And it's good that there's a good bit of depth here. And if there's some guys that are versatile, you can shift guys around if there's injury and things like that. So, and you're probably thinking it's not a whole lot of proven depth though. But when you kind of look at the names and you kind of look at the list of who all's where, there's guys that can emerge, and I think there's going to be multiple stars emerge. I think you're going to have some good things to say about Demarion Thomas. I think he's somebody that you need to watch out for. Glenn Seabrooks, the freshman, could see some early playing time. Again, I think with this position, and probably only this position, only this, I guess, collection of positions, I guess you could say, the defensive line as a whole, I think you're going to see that it doesn't matter really who starts, because I think a lot of these guys are going to play significant minutes in significant type situations, and their rotations and how they're distributed amongst the defensive line will be determined on scouting, game plan, things like that as well. I mean, just different packages, and deploying those different packages in whichever situation fits. Do you want to have a small, fast lineup where you put Corday Sidnor at nose tackle and you just get after it? Or do you want to have a big, heavy group where you bring 2 nose tackles in? What do you want to do situationally? Like if you're playing against an Alabama who could be run heavy, probably not with Kalen DeBoer, but say you're playing, I don't know who's run heavy anymore on the schedule. I guess say you're playing LSU, they'll probably be more run heavy. They're a little bit more old school. But say against LSU, you want to go maybe a 4-down heavier look. I think there's plenty of guys here. I mean, I think Bradley Mann, Christian James has a chance to be kind of that athletic defensive tackle in an odd front look as a 4 technique, or if they base out of a 4-down, which I'm not sure exactly which direction Clark Lee wants to go to. I'm sure he's pretty well versed in that. At Notre Dame, he played a lot of odd front, but he was pretty multiple as well. And I guess it's going to depend on who's good at what and what they like. And if they like their 4-down personnel, maybe they major in that. Or is it going to be game plan oriented? Is it going to be, is it going to be determined by who you're playing? Like, is it going to be different versus LSU than it is against Tennessee or South Carolina or whatever the case may be? What's it going to look like at any given moment? And all of these guys, I think you could see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of these guys play in any sort of combination. So this is, like I said, this is probably the most unproven group. but also it has a pretty good opportunity to be a sleeper group that could really outperform the expectation, because the expectation is that, they're not expected to be world beaters. They're not expected to be, national championship winners or anything like that. They're not projected to be all conference, all that good stuff, right? They've got Corday Sidnor, who came in from the transfer portal. He's the only one that brings any real pedigree. These other guys, they're good. They're talented. Obviously they wouldn't be playing in the SEC, but they're unproven, and going 2-10 a year ago, it's just not, you gotta show it. And with this new defense, they're going to get a chance to show it. And I'm going to tell you how next. All right. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Did you know that Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier? Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes all the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. So there's a lot of cool features. There's a lot of things that when you look in this app that you'll like. And my favorite thing is, quite honestly, the seat views. I love getting a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. Nobody else really does that. Gametime does, and it's phenomenal. They have all-in prices. It shows you the total up front, so there's no surprise fees. So what you see is what you get. I really love the last-minute deals, the flash deals, and the zone deals, all of these things that save you money that are very, very easy. Like last-minute deals, let's say you decide at lunch you want to go to a Red Sox game. Well, you could save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. And it's real. Flash deals, they also have exclusive in-app deals that help you save on select seats ahead of time. So they have featured sections and featured things that you can get there as well. They have the lowest ticket price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 100 to 10% of the difference. Plus, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Doesn't that feel good? Well, if it does, you need to take guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, welcome back. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN and you're tired of all that shouting and all that screaming and bickering and all that? Well, you need to make the switch. And you definitely need to make the switch to Locked On Sports today, because it's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Isn't that nice? So Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we talked about, we're going to continue our defensive line discussion, because this is going to be a fun group. Now, I told you that there's not really any stars in this group. There's one potential star who's been kind of a standout in Vandy spring practices, but there's no stars. But that doesn't mean this group isn't exciting. This group is going to be great, and this group's going to be fun to watch. Why? Because you're going to see some stars emerge under Clark Lee. You're going to see some guys get in the mix and really kind of make a difference with these stats. And this group is a fairly deep group, honestly. And I think they can all play. It's just a matter of who's going to take advantage of the opportunity when it's presented, and who's going to make the plays, things like that. So no matter what the configuration is, I think you're going to have a pretty good situationally good defensive line, because, it's going to come down to, I think the defensive analysts are going to play a huge role in the success of this position group, because situationally they're going to have to get creative, because there's so many different skill sets in there, and there's so many different guys that can do different things probably, and you're going to have to your rotations are going to have to be intentional. Your rotations are going to have to be situationally intentional. And you're going to have to get creative in how you arrange those guys. So, but what those guys have to accomplish, okay? So no matter who's in there, regardless of the rotation, regardless of the personnel, whether you got all smalls, whether you got all large guys, odd front, even front, whatever the case may be, you have to be stingy versus the run because you weren't very stingy last year, and you have to get pressure on the quarterback because you really didn't. I mean, you were okay at that, but you really didn't do a good job with that either. So some things by the numbers, okay? Sacks, I think 21 for 145 yards is okay. Your opponents were getting 27 sacks for 175 yards on you. So you got to get pressure on. You got to get pressure in the face of the quarterback. Sacks are great, but even just hurries. If you just get hurries, turnovers will happen. Fumbles will happen. Rushing, opponents were gaining 2,004 yards on the season total. Right? This was 170. This was good for 175 average per game. They scored 23 touchdowns on the ground to Vandy's 10. They had way more carries, 413 to 349, and there was 250 yards in lost yardage. So in the grand scheme of things, that's not a ton, right? And so you have to be, and then if you're stingy against the run, these passing numbers will be affected as well. 3,355 yards passing total against you for an average of, I don't think it's a game average, but average per catch, 279.6. I don't really understand that stat, but whatever. Teams were averaging 454.9 yards per game on average, so total offense. So all that to say, you get stingy against the run, everything else is going to kind of fall in place, right? You're going to get pressure on the quarterback. You're going to be stingy against the run. Those totals are going to go down a little bit. Turnovers will probably end up going up as a result. So what do you have to do that? Okay. That's easy to say, well, they got to be stingy against the run, right? Like that, like you could hire the guy in row 13 of section S to tell you that they need to be stingy against the run and get pressure on the quarterback. But what is that going to look like, right? Now, last year, I don't think didn't look like they really had a plan. Substitution patterns, blitzes, stunts, movement, things like that. Just didn't really look like they were trying to disrupt. It looked like they were just trying to read and react, play football, which is a fine philosophy. I don't. That's not a bad philosophy. It's just not good when your personnel is undermatched in most of your games. And in the SEC, they probably will be because there's some really good offensive lines in the SEC. And that's not a knock on Vandy's defensive line by any stretch, but there's some behemoths that can move on the offensive line throughout the entire conference. So it's a chess match, right? So you have to counter that. And in order to counter that, you have to what's the thing that defensive lines hate or offensive lines hate when you're blocking a defensive line? I know as an offensive play caller, I hated when defensive lines slanted, and I hated when they gap exchanged. Okay. And what that means is like a linebacker and a defensive lineman are paired up, and base rules say that depending on the alignment of your defensive lineman, let's say it's an interior guy, he's in a 3 technique, which is the outside shade of the guard. More than likely, he'll have B gap, and that linebacker sitting behind him who's paired up will have the A gap inside. Well, on a gap exchange, you get a beat on them by alignment. On a gap exchange, the defensive lineman will crash down to the A gap, and the linebacker will scrape to the B, causing a little bit of a cross. What that does for the guard is it makes him think, do I chase or do I stick to my gap if it's a zone run scheme or if it's a pass protection scheme, whatever the scheme may be. If his job is in the B gap, when his defender in the B gap leaves the B gap. Does he chase? And sometimes about 50-50 chance. Sometimes they chase, sometimes they don't. It just depends on the situation. Depends on the situation, depends on how tight things are, depends on how much pressure they've been getting all game long, depends on a lot of things. So in order to do that, you have to, like, your job as a defensive lineman, especially if you're a little bit behind size or talent-wise, you have to move. You have to confuse those guys. You have to get offensive linemen to chase and to vacate gaps and to open up lanes for unblocked defenders. Okay, the defensive linemen, if the rushing numbers go down and the quarterback pressures go up and they don't make a whole lot of tackles, that's okay. That means they're eating up blockers. That means they're opening up large creases for unblocked linebackers. And when there's unblocked linebackers and there's big openings, they can shoot through those and limit yardage, put the team behind the sticks. And then ultimately, as I mentioned on the last episode, be better on third down. If they can get better on third down, it means they've won first down by moving gaps and moving linemen and not relying on just read, rip, and react. Okay. You have to create opportunities for yourself. And to do so, you're going to have to play games. You're going to have to twist. You're going to have to stunt. And when I say twist, that means you shoot down 1 to 2 gaps. Somebody loops back around to cover your gap. Confuses offensive linemen because they think, oh, my guy's vacating. I'm going to chase. And when he chases, that guy, the other defender comes back around the other side. There's nobody there to block him. And sometimes offensive line will catch you in some of these twists, and their schemes will pick it up, and you're a little bit vulnerable too, which you got to take big risks, right? If you don't take big risk, there's no big reward really. So in order to do that, that's what you got to do. So to me, these guys have got to be the key to that scheme wise is these guys got to be active. They can't hunker down at the line of scrimmage and hope that they can read and react and get off blocks. They can't rely on that. They have to move. They have to disrupt. They have to cause havoc. And then they have to let you know about it. Because Corday Sidnor brought the noise at practice. And that probably annoyed the offense. And that's great. That's a great thing to read. Unfortunately, on the offensive perspective, it's not a phenomenal thing to read, but the defense is always ahead of the offense. As they say, that's not a cliche. That's an actual fact. Most of the time in those situations, the defense is always kind of ahead because they're more reactionary and the offense is more timing based. It just is what it is. But I'm excited about this defensive line. I'm really excited to see how they're going to pressure the quarterback, how they can collapse the pocket up the middle, how they can get pressure off the edges, how they can move offensive linemen, how they can get them off their spots, off their rhythm, mess with their reads, things like that. I'm curious to see how that works. I'm curious to see the rotations, and I'm very excited to see which stars emerge along this defensive line, whether it's even front, on front, whatever the case may be. I think you're going to see some really good situations here. So I'm excited about it. You should be too. All right. But Mizzou, that's going to be a team that is going to be tough to deal with. Does Vandy have a shot? We'll see. All right. Welcome back. As we wrap up the show, thank you for making Locked On Vandy your first listen each and every day. Thank you to the everydayers. You make this all possible. And I love that you're around. I love that you guys are spreading the word. Keep doing what you're doing, everydayers. The club will get bigger, I promise. And I'm looking forward to football season. So defensive line is going to be incredible, right? They're going to be a massive key. And the reason they're not talked about more is because there's no big stars. And I'm excited about this group, though. I think somebody can emerge. I think there's somebody that can come out of this thing and say, hey, I'm the guy, follow me. And the guy that teams have to, game plan against. So, but does Vandy have a shot at Mizzou? I don't know. Like I've been looking at this game going, they might have a shot. It's early in the season. They might have a shot. And I'm gonna sunshine pump a little bit, and then I'm gonna be realistic, because realistically, Luther Burden and Theo Weiss are going to be hell to deal with Brady Cook coming back. They combined for 1,894 yards on 135 catches last season. They are coming back. They're probably gonna add to that. You lose Schrader, which is a big. You lose Cody Schrader, which is that's a big loss there in the run game. But like, this is an explosive team. This is a team that came out in the bowl game. I believe it was the Cotton Bowl against Ohio State and just shellacked them. So this is a team that, since the Georgia game, not last season, but the season before that, when it was on the ropes, right? Georgia's, that game was on the ropes. Eli Drinkowitz was on the ropes. Like, he was probably going to get fired. Let's just be real about it. He was going to get fired after that game, because coming into it, they're going to get shellacked. They're not much to write home about, all of that good stuff, right? Well, they rally, and I'm not one for moral victories, but that moral victory paved the way for the shellacking they put on Ohio State in the bowl game. Like, that's what got it all started, right? So Missouri has a really, really good team. They have really explosive weapons. I think their biggest hole offensively, they're going to have to find some sort of a run game, right? They had some transfers on the offensive line, but like, ultimately, like, are they going to be one-dimensional, right? Are they going to be able to run the ball well enough to be able to expose defenses with Luther Burden and Theo Weiss on a consistent enough basis to outlast a lot of these SEC teams? Because they'll strike on you early, because those guys are good. But once teams discover throughout the course of a game that they're really not, this is all hypothetical, but if a team can discover that you're not one-dimensional, which that's Missouri's biggest question mark, you have a chance. And if Vandy can be pesky and disruptive, they've got some corners that could possibly handle these guys. I think if they can be stingy against the run, force you to beat them with the pass, like, they have a shot, right? They have a shot. But then again, realistically speaking, you're trying to cover Luther Burden and Theo Weiss, who went off last year. So that's going to be tough to overcome offensively. If the defense plays in a fashion that shuts those guys down and those guys struggle, the offense is going to have to capitalize on that, right? And Missouri lost three DBs to the NFL. They had a defensive lineman get drafted as well, in Darius Robinson. They lost their defensive coordinator, who made a lateral move. But they hit the portal. They finished 25 in total defense last year, and a lot of it was the draftees. But I think this is going to be a situation where Missouri's going to have to kind of retool on defense. And early in the season, they struggle. Teams struggle. And you have to understand that as teams are kind of getting a feel of things, if this is the first conference game, if Vandy can be very, very stingy on defense, if they can be very tricky offensively, they might have a shot. They very well could have a shot. And that's all Vandy needs, is a shot, because you'll see how the culture is affected if Vandy is in striking distance in the fourth quarter in this game. You'll see how Diego Pavia can lead the bunch then. If it's tight in the fourth quarter, how does he respond? Right? They're going to have to capitalize, because this defense is still, they've got a lot of questions to answer. this is the first time they've really had to replace NFL guys like that. Can they, have they recruited well enough to replace those guys? I mean, they have a talented roster. Obviously they have a talented roster. They went to a major bowl game. They're in playoff contention again this year, and with an expanded field, they have a good shot at being in the tournament. But they're going to have to, their new defensive coordinator is going to have to figure out who fits where and what the scenarios are. How can they get pressure on the quarterback again? How can they, on the back end, are they going to be able to find guys that replace those 3 defensive backs that got drafted? Can they cover? That's all remains to be seen. How are they going to do against the run? That's going to be very important when Vandy comes into play. How's that going to happen? So more questions will be answered with that game, and you'll see in the opener just kind of how they click a little bit, how they, how do they handle adversity? Let's say Vandy causes a turnover. How do they handle that? How does the crowd handle that? Does the crowd stay behind them because they know now that this team is not going to fold because they haven't folded? They didn't fold last year in the face of adversity. How does the crowd react? How does Drink react? Do they panic? Against a team like Vandy, do they panic because they're supposed to be killing Vandy? Right? Like if Vandy's in this game, like how do they respond to that? Do they get tight? When teams get tight, historically, it's trouble. How does that happen? Like, how do they respond to these things, right? That's going to be the questions that have to be answered with Missouri. So the question is, does Vandy have a chance? Yeah, they have a chance because Missouri has a lot more questions than you think. But they're a good team, and they will likely pull out the victory in this, being realistic. I'm not counting this as a Vandy win, but they have a shot. That's all they need. They have a shot. They have a legitimate shot. But they got to cover Luther Burden. That's a tough gig. They got to cover Theo Weiss. If they cover Luther Burden, they still got to deal with Theo Weiss. And that's a task too. So accomplish those tasks, see what happens after that, take the crowd out of the game, see where you are in the fourth quarter. You might just like where you're at. But anyway, so a quick programming note. Unless things change, don't expect to see me the rest of this week. Tomorrow and Friday, I will likely take my last long break before the grind of the season. So I will likely be out, but that could change if I feel like doing a show. But if I don't see you, happy 4th of July. Stay safe. Be responsible. All that good stuff. We'll see you back here next week. And we'll start the grind of the season, man. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun season, and we'll continue on. We'll press on with the Locked On Vandy podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. Anchor down.